Say your name. What is up, everyone? We're gonna watch this. Your indie game story probably stinks. Let's get on.
If you're a game developer like me and you're trying to make a game centered around a story, balancing gameplay and plot is a lot harder than you might think. I learned this the hard way this past year. When I started development on my own game, Reality Box, the idea that sparked everything was a very simple storyline. 10 college students find themselves stuck inside a reality TV show death game. Simple enough, but figuring out the gameplay was shockingly difficult. At first I tried making a speedrunning platformer similar to Neon White, but over time I realized just how much that style of game takes away from my original vision of finding alliances and making enemies, so I had to change it. Then I tried making a classic turn-based RPG, something that would leave a lot of flexibility for the story. After prototyping for a few weeks, I realized that turning these average college students into borderline action heroes was not at all the way I wanted things to go. Eventually I did end up on what we have now, combat in the form of a game show, which is a lot more fitting in pretty much every way, but it took a very long time to get there. So how can we approach balancing gameplay with story? If you're making your own game, maybe you already have a story, but you want to find the best way to fit it into the gameplay. Maybe you have a really fun game already, but you're not sure how to make something more out of it. I put together a list of 5 tips that I think are pretty substantial in creating a story for your game. I'm sure some of these tips will apply to any form of storytelling, but I tried my best to pick from my own experiences the ones that will really help you find the magic in your game. And by the way, if you're new here, I'm Apox.
Oh wow. Oh wow. Okay. Dang. I see this. Okay. Wowzers. Interesting. Okay. This is good to know. Hey, Phoenix. Thank you.
Fox, and I make game design videos every week. If you learned something new in this video and want to see more, consider subscribing. We'd love to have you. Now on to the list of 5 tips that I truly believe are key for creating the best possible story for your game. And to kick things off, tip number 1 is to start with gameplay. I might as well finish my earlier point that building a game off of gameplay instead of story makes things a lot easier in the long run. Hear me out, it's not the end of the world if you start with the story first. Obviously, because that's how I did it, but I truly believe that things probably would have gone a lot smoother if I started with gameplay. And I feel like most successful games do this anyways. Nintendo is the biggest example of favoring gameplay over story, at least early on in development of their games. Miyamoto himself has some pretty strong opinions on how story should only be there to supplement gameplay. A lot of these opinions I do not fully agree with, but I do think this design philosophy is also part of what makes Nintendo games so great. When Zelda Tears of the Kingdom came out, it faced a lot of design problems for the fact that it's a sequel to Breath of the Wild, using the same map, and most importantly, continuing the same story. To keep things fresh, the developers decided to make a cool new mechanic where Link can now craft his own weapons. The problem is that Breath of the Wild had a lot of really strong weapons already, so why would the player waste time crafting weapons when they could just go back and find the old ones that are just as powerful? Well, there's 2 options here. Option 1, they could say, hey, this mechanic is fun, but it doesn't fit in our story, so let's not—
Are you talking about? And I will always love you. Wait, no, that's not. That's Celine Dion. What do you mean some Titanic? Are you talking about when they sing to for like when Jack and Rose are on the things like and here forever will be you and I actually don't know any of the Titanic songs. These guys like all the songs when they are basically dying.
Do it. It's a shame to lose a cool mechanic, but if you want to put story first, you just have to accept that you're also limiting gameplay ideas. The second option would be to change the story. Add some sort of plot device that makes this mechanic work. Maybe Ganon's powers are so evil that it rusts every weapon in the game, and now the only way to get stronger weapons is to craft them yourself. And that's exactly what they did. Yeah, this solution is a little stupid, but it's a prime example of what it's like to build gameplay around a pre-existing story. They could have found another lore-accurate way to resolve this situation by changing the gameplay, but stories are a lot more flexible. And in the end, I do think that deciding to put gameplay first made for a better game. My point here is that starting your game with the story can restrict things a lot. You can definitely still make it work, but at some point you have to accept that your story will need to change change in order to better fit the game side of things. I really don't want to come off like I'm saying gameplay is more important than the story you want to tell, but you have to be really careful how you approach storytelling. And if you start creating all these big events and plot points, you're really locking yourself into something that might not even work when you get to it. Start with a solid foundation by making a really fun game, then build upon that foundation with a story that fits like a puzzle piece.
I see my problem now.
The next tip is to hook players with your story as soon as possible. It might sound obvious as a general storytelling guideline, it's advice you've probably already heard before, but when it comes to video games, hooks are handled very differently. Let's set the stage a little bit. Say you're making an RPG about a knight who's on a quest to save a princess from a dragon. Based on that description alone, there's a very low chance that someone's gonna want to play this game. It's a game that we've seen 1,000 times before. You could secretly have an amazing story with lots of twists and great characters, but if there's no real hook to your game right out of the gate, no one's going to play long enough to see all that because they probably won't play it in the first place. But if you add a unique hook that's never been done before, maybe instead you play as the dragon who's framed by the knight for kidnapping the princess so that he can save her and become king. It's already 10 times more interesting. I think that newer indie game developers have a possibly unwarranted confidence when it comes to their games. Don't worry, I'm definitely included in this. We believe so deeply in the story we're trying to tell that we end up forgetting that we still need to prove ourselves to our players. No matter how good you think your story is, you can't just assume that everyone's going to go into your game expecting that same greatness. And if they're not expecting greatness, they're probably not going to play your game. So you have to hook them right away, before they get through the tutorial, and honestly, preferably before they even buy the game to begin with. But this is still pretty baseline storytelling advice, so let's translate it to video games. In Hades, you play as the god of the underworld's rebellious and angsty son Zagreus, who's trying to run away from home. At first glance, it's already pretty intriguing, but very quickly the game gives you so many reasons to want to see the world above. From your aunts and uncles explaining how much fun they're having on Olympus, to the mystery of Zagreus' mother, it's impossible to not be at least curious what's up there, no matter how challenging the journey to get there may be. This hook not only serves as a glimpse of what to expect in the game, but also provides a motivation to see it through to the end, which is really key for getting someone to play your game. The goal here is to find that one thing that makes your game special and put that right at the forefront. Time for a bonus tip. There's actually a...
You know what's crazy? I've been so focused on the story because I feel like you need to complete the story in order to have the gameplay. Because I'm so used to visual novels that I never really considered the possibility of doing the opposite. And honestly, I think that could be a reason why we could get so stuck. Because always thinking about the asset. Because you're always like, well, you go always do a visual novel. Instead of that, I'm like, this is actually something that I could actually think of why it's so tough to make a game.
Really awesome class by Daniel Jose Older called Storytelling 101, and although he dives into some of the broader topics of fiction storytelling, I think he does a great job of explaining this idea of balancing different elements in your stories. You can actually find this class on Skillshare, the sponsor of this video. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, design, productivity, and you guessed it, even game outs of game design came from diving deep into these. Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now back to some more storytelling tips. Let me ask you this, what separates a video game story from, say, a book? The only way to experience a book is by reading it, and no matter how you choose to read the book, nothing in the story is gonna change. You experience it the way it's intended, and that's it. Video games are obviously a little different because instead of there being just one way to experience a game, telling a story is just as much the player's responsibility as it is the developer's. It's more like a collaboration. The developer sets the stage and presents obstacles and events, and the player decides how everything unfolds within those events. Now, I'm not saying at all that every game needs to have branching paths and unique endings. What I'm trying to say is that every player is different, and it's a developer's responsibility to make those differences count for something. Don't act like a writer or director, act like a dungeon master. Let me give you an example. Very early on in Elden Ring, you come across Margit, the first major boss of the game. No matter how you play, defeating Margit is the only way to progress the story.
Or is it?
If you're stuck fighting Margit over and over again with no luck, you might decide to instead go somewhere else and level up. Find some stronger gear and weapons. By just allowing the player to turn back and experience something else, you're also actively letting the player choose their own adventure, shaping the story around their own experiences. When they finally return to fight Margit, it'll be a lot easier, and that feels earned. Another great example of this is Persona 5. Persona's story revolves around a deadline system. You're given a certain amount of days to complete a dungeon, but you can also spend those days doing whatever you'd like. Spending time with friends, watching a movie, getting massage from your teacher. The only responsibility you have is to make sure the dungeon is complete by that deadline. Once the deadline is reached, the story continues on like normal, but every player will leave with a different experience, which is what makes these games so special. The point is, don't be a control freak. Let your players experience the story in their own way, in whatever form that might be, because otherwise, you might as well just be writing a book. Embrace the fact that you're making a game. Over the past 10 years, I feel like the gaming community has become obsessed with this idea of environmental storytelling. The first place I remember hearing about it was in Skyrim. Sometimes while exploring the world, you'd come across these small landmarks like camps.
People have become obsessed with looking at backgrounds and the graphics and everything, which is funny when people were looking at my game, which is not far at all because of so much personal issues and not a lot of funding because personal issues. Um, I'm not kickstarting it until I feel like more confident in it. But um, my game, right? It looks very retro right now, and people are like, "Oh, it gives that old vibe." I was like, "Old vibe?" They're like, "Yeah, I like it." I was like, "You like the old vibe?" They're like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's interesting." I was like, "Good to know, I guess." And they're like, "Yeah, it's like that '80s feel, '80s." And I was like, "I guess nostalgia works in that factor." So yeah.
Or shrines. This really didn't have anything to do with the overall story, but it was still really cool to find stuff like this and try to piece together how these landmarks came to be. In reality though, I think environmental storytelling goes much deeper than you might think. These aren't just random landmarks for storytelling purposes, they're actually incredibly sophisticated and intentional design choices that bring all elements of the game to the forefront in order to support the story. Using Skyrim as a shining example, let's talk about everything that happens when you come across an abandoned campsite. Sometimes there are enemies, an opportunity to get some XP or maybe some loot. Sometimes there's an NPC there to give you a new quest. Usually there's also a cooking station for making some food, or maybe an alchemy table for making potions. You could also risk using some of these tents to sleep through the night, something that might make traveling a little easier. By allowing the player to engage with gameplay mechanics, this seemingly random encounter of a campsite becomes a memorable moment in their own story. This is all to say that a video game story isn't just something that you write. A well-designed game writes itself. Think of your game as a recipe. Each ingredient represents a different element of your game. You've got the main ingredients like gameplay, story, art, and music, which are really your meat and potatoes. And then you've got the spices that enhance the whole experience. These are your characters, the theme and atmosphere of your game. Anything that takes those main ingredients to the next level. If any of these ingredients are missing, it could ruin the entire dish. But when all these ingredients work together in tandem, you end up with something that tastes really good. I'm kind of hungry now. My point is that story works best when all elements are equally important. If you want your player to become fully invested in your story, that means more than just having good writing. When every ingredient is just right, the story doesn't just unfold, it simmers, builds, and leaves a lasting taste. That's a recipe for a story players won't just remember, but savor.
I think that's why visual novels have a niche in it when it's just mostly story writing and good visual art because it's like, you know, it's point and click and dialogue. some people have become more advanced in what they're doing, but yeah, it becomes very tough in being able to disclose and listen, say, and do a lot of the things that need to be done when it comes to those type of games. So yeah, oh no, I'm trying to figure out what can be best done with the type of game I'm doing. The ending, I believe, is always so important.
So we've already gone over all the essentials, how to hook your player and keep them invested. But there's just one thing missing. How can we make sure that all these promises we set forth in the beginning come to a satisfying conclusion? Let's start by understanding endings from a purely narrative standpoint. In my opinion, an ending needs to achieve 3 things in order to feel like it was fully worth the journey. 1, the climax of the story needs to feel like a climax. Every plot thread needs to come to a head, making it feel like, wow, I was warned about this, but I was not prepared. Winter finally came in Game of Thrones, but it's worse than expected. In more ways than one, but let's not get controversial here. 2, all loose ends need to be tied up in a nice bow. Any character arcs and mysteries reach their natural closure, making you feel like all that buildup was worth it. And 3, you gotta leave your audience with something to think about. This could be a reflection on their own life, or an open-ended question of what happens after the curtains close. These are 3 things that are essential for making an ending feel genuinely satisfying. The problem with video game storytelling is that it's almost impossible to achieve all 3 of these. Like I mentioned earlier, video
It really
game
is.
stories are told by both the developer and the player. Everyone's gonna have a different experience, so how can we make an ending that satisfies everybody? The honest answer, you can't. Even if you made 100 different endings that suited 100 different players' experience.
You know he's not wrong. He really is not wrong because I was thinking about Undertale and people were talking about like, listen, the whole 30 endings aren't necessary. Like, you know, the genocide, good, bad ending, I was like neutral. I was like, yeah, I understand those. And then I was thinking of all those 30 alt endings, and people were like, I was like, do you think those are? And some people were like, yeah, because the completionist. And then I was just like, okay, but to me, I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I don't plan on doing those endings. So like, yeah, I get it. I get it.
There's still going to be some people who are left unsatisfied. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, storytelling is subjective. You and I probably have very different ideas of what makes a perfect story, and that's totally fine. We've both lived different lives, experienced different emotions, and connect with different stories. Our differences are what makes our lives mean something. So even if we're playing the same game, no matter what, we're still gonna come out with a different experience. All that said, the perfect way to write your game is to embrace those differences and share your perspective. A great story is one that comes from a place of honesty and vulnerability. By trusting your own instincts, not everyone will connect, but for the ones who do, it's going to really mean something. A story that satisfies everyone is good, but one that is deeply personal has far greater power. Maybe you disagree, but you know, that's also kind of the point. At the end of the day, the magic of video game storytelling comes from your own creativity. If you fall in love with the story you want to tell, I'm sure someone out there will fall in love too. My name is Apox Fox. Subscribe to the channel for more game design videos. I'll see you next week.
What do you guys think of this video? I agree with this one. Like, I was thinking for a while now, like why I felt stuck or felt like this wouldn't work out with my game, or why some of my games would go into like development torture. And I think this is a good reason as to why that is because there's no focus on the gameplay, or we're like too focused on the story to figure out the gameplay. And so like it becomes like a whole mess up of things because it's like, well, if we're focusing on this, then it's gonna be very tough to figure out how to get to point A to point C essentially because we're skipping point B altogether. But yeah, what are you guys' thoughts on this video? Let me know in your comments down below. And with that being said, y'all have a good one. Ciao for now.